The millionaire is going to charge a poor old woman rent, but she says, "Take my granddaughter as payment." Then he leaves with this 6-year-old girl, but is shocked by what she reveals about the old woman. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The sun beat down on the dusty roads of Harmony Creek in rural Mississippi as Brad Sterling's black Escalade kicked up dirt in its wake. The locals watched with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. Everyone knew the 48-year-old businessman who owned dozens of properties in the area. His stern face and impeccable suit, even in the intense heat, were his trademark, as was his reputation for being inflexible with tenants behind on their rent. That Thursday afternoon, his destination was a simple house on the outskirts of town. The address was marked in his planner: residence of Josephine Quinton, 76 years old, 3 months behind on rent. Brad parked in front of the worn wooden gate, adjusted his navy blue tie, and grabbed his leather briefcase. As he walked through the small, unkempt yard, he noticed children's clothes hanging on a makeshift clothesline. Before he could knock on the door, he heard a clear, ringing laugh coming from the back of the house. Rounding the corner, he found a scene that made him pause for a moment. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, was playing with rag dolls under the shade of an old oak tree. Her dress, though visibly worn, was clean and neatly pressed. Beside her, an elderly woman with grey hair was struggling to manipulate something in her hands. "Grandma, let me help," the girl said, dropping her dolls and running to the old woman. You're shaking again." Brad cleared his throat, announcing his presence. Josephine looked up, and her face paled as she recognized him. Quickly, she hid her hands under a faded shawl. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice trembling, I was expecting you." The girl, Lily, looked curiously at the visitor, her big, expressive eyes studying every detail of his appearance. "Are you the owner of our house?" she asked with disarming frankness. Before Brad could answer, Josephine tried to get up, but her legs failed her. Lily ran to support her, demonstrating a surprising maturity for her age. It was at that moment that the shawl slipped, revealing the old woman's hands, gnarled and swollen fingers, with visible nodules on her joints. "Mrs. Quinton," Brad began, his professional tone masking any emotion, "you are 3 months behind on your rent. I came personally because your checks bounced, and you haven't been answering our calls." Josephine lowered her head, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "Mr. Sterling, I can explain. Since my hands—" "Grandma used to make the prettiest quilts in town," Lily interrupted, running inside the house. She returned seconds later carrying something wrapped in a clean cloth. "Look." She carefully unfolded the cloth, revealing a quilt of extraordinary delicacy. The intricate pattern formed flowers and arabesques that seemed to dance on the fabric. Brad felt something strange in his chest. The design was familiar, triggering a distant memory he couldn't quite grasp. "Lily, put that away," Josephine ordered, but her voice betrayed a pride she couldn't hide. "Mr. Sterling didn't come here to see old quilts." It was then that the old woman did something that left Brad stunned. With difficulty, she knelt before him. "Please, Mr. Sterling, don't put us out on the street. I can offer something in exchange for the rent. Lily is a very smart girl. She can help in your house, clean, organize." The businessman recoiled a step, shocked. That desperate proposal awakened something in him, a hazy memory of his own childhood, a feeling he had long tried to stifle. He looked at Lily, who was now holding her rag doll tightly, her wide eyes fixed on her kneeling grandmother. "Mrs. Quinton, please stand up," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I would like to see more of these quilts." Josephine raised her face, confused. Lily, on the other hand, broke into a radiant smile and took Brad's hand, pulling him toward the back of the house. "Come see Grandma's treasure chest." In the yard, partially buried under the oak tree, was an old wooden chest. As Lily tried To open it, Brad noticed something that disturbed him deeply. Recent marks of removed earth around the chest, as if someone had tried to dig it up in a hurry. "Why is the chest buried, Mrs. Quinton?" he asked, his professional suspicion returning. The old woman twisted the shawl in her deformed hands. "When those men came last week, they said they were going to take everything to pay off the debts." Brad frowned. He hadn't authorized any collections other than the formal notices. Something was wrong. And the more he observed the scene, the frail grandmother, the precocious granddaughter, the buried chest, the more certain he was that there was a much bigger story behind that simple rent arrears. "Who were these men, Mrs. Quinton?" he asked, already taking out his cell phone to make a call. But before Josephine could answer, Lily finally managed to open the chest, and what Brad saw inside made his blood run cold. There, carefully folded, were dozens of quilts, some with state award labels. But what really caught his attention were the dark stains on some pieces, a liquid that appeared to have been spilled recently. And under the quilts, a brown envelope with a name he knew very well. Brad held the envelope with trembling hands, his name written in a handwriting he hadn't seen in decades. The date in the upper corner indicated 15 years ago. Before he could open it, Josephine snatched it from his hands with surprising agility for someone with such severe arthritis. "This is nothing," she said, hiding the envelope in the folds of her dress. "They're just old papers." But Brad couldn't take his eyes off the spot where the envelope had disappeared. The handwriting belonged to Doris, the housekeeper who had taken care of him at the orphanage before his adoption. How had that letter gotten there, and why was Josephine guarding it so zealously? "Grandma, show him the butterfly quilt," Lily exclaimed, breaking the tension of the moment. Her small hands plunged into the chest, pulling out a particularly delicate piece. The pattern was extraordinary. Intertwined butterflies that seemed ready to take flight from the fabric. Brad sat down on a makeshift bench in the yard, feeling the weight of long-buried memories. "Mrs. Quinton, I need you to tell me about these men who came here, every detail." Josephine settled into her chair, her hands restless under the shawl. "It started 3 months ago, when my hands got worse. I used to make the best quilts in Harmony Creek, you know. I earned enough to raise Lily and pay the rent, but then—" She held up her deformed hands, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "Grandma cried every night," Lily interjected, hugging her grandmother. "The needles kept falling, and she couldn't make the quilts right anymore." "That's when he showed up," Josephine continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Arnold Pierce said he was your partner, Mr. Sterling. Offered a loan, low interest, said I could pay it back when my hands got better." Brad stood up abruptly. Arnold had been his partner for 15 years, responsible for the financial side of the business, but he had never authorized personal loans to tenants. "How much did you borrow?" $15,000 at first. But the interest, every week he said it increased. The last time he came, it was already 40,000. The businessman felt his blood boil. Loan sharks disguised as businessmen were common in small towns, but using his name to extort vulnerable tenants. That explained the dark stains on the quilts, probably coffee spilled during a collection visit. At that moment, Daisy Miller, his 43-year-old secretary, arrived breathless in the yard. Brad had sent her a silent message while they were talking. "Boss, those documents you asked for—" She stopped when she saw Lily playing with the quilts. "My God, that pattern! It's identical to the curtains in your old house." Brad felt as if the air had been sucked out of his lungs. The curtains. In the mansion where he had grown up after being adopted, the ones he had always admired without knowing their origin. He approached the chest, examining each piece with new interest. "Mrs. Quinton, did you know a woman named Doris?" The old woman's face paled even further. "My sister," she replied after a long silence. She left for Jackson 40 years ago, wanting a better life. She sent money every month, said she worked in a big house. Taking care of an orphaned boy, Brad finished, his voice choked with emotion. Lily, who was watching everything with attention beyond her age, picked up one of the oldest quilts in the chest. Grandma said Aunt Doris made this special design just for one person, a little boy she loved like a son. The businessman staggered, needing to lean on the oak tree. Doris had been more than just a housekeeper. She was the first person to show him true affection at the orphanage. But after his adoption, he never saw her again. Years later, when he tried to find her, they told him she had left. Daisy cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. Mr. Sterling, there's more. I found records of irregular loans in the company's name, dozens of them, all managed by Mr. Pierce, and that's not the worst of it. She hesitated, looking significantly at Lily. Brad understood the message. Lily, honey, how about showing Daisy your room? I'm sure she would love to see your dolls. As soon as the two entered the house, Daisy continued in a low voice. Arnold is selling the company's smaller properties, sir. Fake contracts, forged signatures, and there are records of threats to tenants all over town. The sound of a car screeching to a halt in front of the house interrupted the conversation. Heavy footsteps approached through the yard, and soon Arnold Pierce, 52 years old, appeared in the yard. His expensive suit didn't match his predatory smile. "Brad, what a surprise to find you here," he said, but his eyes fixed on the open chest. "I see Mrs. Quinton has already shown you her treasure." "How did you know about the chest?" Brad asked, instinctively placing himself between Arnold and Josephine. "Oh, Mrs. Quinton and I have been talking a lot lately, including about certain old letters that might be of interest to many people." He smiled, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "Especially this one which I found last week." Josephine let out an anguished moan. "You can't." "I can, and I will," Arnold cut in, "unless everyone here wants to make a deal." His gaze turned to Brad. "You've always been so proud of your success story, my friend, the orphan who became a businessman. Imagine if they found out the truth about your adoption." It was then that a child's cry came from inside the house. "Grandma! Grandma! I found more letters under the floorboards!" Arnold's face twisted in fury. He advanced towards the house, but Brad held his arm. What happened next would leave deep marks on everyone present, especially on a little girl, who unintentionally had just unearthed secrets kept for decades. The sound of Lily's footsteps echoed through the house as she ran towards the yard, carrying a worn shoebox. Arnold tried to advance again, but Brad held him firmly in place. The tension was palpable in the hot Mississippi afternoon air. "Look, what I found!" Lily exclaimed, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. "It was all hidden under the loose board, along with the photos." Josephine stood up with difficulty, her face a mask of worry. "Lily, my sweetie, put that away." But it was too late. The old photos were already scattered on the grass, revealing images yellowed by time. In one of them, a young Doris smiled next to a boy of approximately 8 years old. Brad recognized himself immediately. In their hands, they held a newly finished quilt, the same butterfly pattern that now lay in the chest. "Enough of this nonsense!" Arnold yelled, finally managing to break free. "You have no idea what's at stake here." Daisy, who was watching everything from the door of the house, quickly grabbed her cell phone and started filming discreetly. Years working with Brad had taught her to always document tense situations. "What are you talking about, Arnold?" Brad asked, his voice controlled, but his eyes flashing with anger. "What truth is this about my adoption that you mentioned?" The partner let out a bitter laugh. "Why don't you ask Mrs. Quinton? Or better yet, why don't you read the letters that the late Doris left behind? I'm sure you'll love knowing how your precious story of overcoming adversity is a fraud." Josephine, who had remained silent until then, stepped forward. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was firm. "My sister never wanted him to know. She made me promise." "Know what?" Brad demanded, his heart pounding in his chest. It was Lily who answered, her childish voice filled with innocence as she read a piece of paper she had taken from the box. "Dear Josephine, I can't stand to see little Brad suffering anymore. The Sterling family treats him like a trophy, a charity project to display at social events. But I can't do anything. They threatened to report me if I tried." "Lily, stop!" Josephine cried, but the girl continued. "I found out that they paid to have me removed from the orphanage, made up stories about me, all because I knew the truth about the accident that killed Brad's biological parents. It wasn't a common accident. It was caused by—" Arnold moved quickly, trying to grab the letter, but Daisy was faster. She placed herself between him and the girl, protecting Lily with her body. "Don't you dare touch her," the secretary warned, still filming everything. At that moment, a car parked in front of the house. Olivia Mitchell, Brad's ex-wife and a respected 46-year-old lawyer, got out in a hurry. Daisy had sent her a distress message minutes before. "What's going on here?" Olivia asked, her sharp eyes assessing the scene. "Your presence isn't going to change anything," Arnold growled. "I have documents proving that Brad embezzled money from the company in recent months. The board has already been notified." Brad paled. It was true. He had transferred a considerable sum to a clinic specializing in experimental treatments for arthritis, hoping to help Josephine. But how had Arnold found out? "Interesting you mentioned documents," Olivia replied calmly, pulling a folder from her purse. "Because I have a few here too. For example, records of illegal loans you made using the company's name, or receipts for bribes paid to keep certain investigations buried." Arnold's face twisted into a mask of fury. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" Olivia smiled, taking a flash drive from her pocket. "Your former secretary, Marlene, disagrees. She kept copies of everything before you unfairly fired her, including how you discovered the true story of the Sterling family and planned to use it to take control of the company." While the adults argued, Lily continued rummaging through the shoebox. Her eyes lit up as she found something at the bottom. "Grandma, look, it's just like the necklace Uncle Brad wears." All eyes turned to the girl, who was holding an old St. George medal. Brad instinctively touched the identical one he wore around his neck, a gift from Doris on his last day at the orphanage. "My sister insisted on buying matching medals," Josephine explained softly. "One for her, one for you, and one that she kept for the day she could tell the truth." "What truth?" Brad asked, his voice almost a whisper. "That your parents didn't die in an accident," Josephine replied, tears streaming down her face. "They were investigating a corruption scheme involving the Sterling family. Doris found out everything because a crash interrupted her. Arnold had knocked over the chest, scattering the quilts across the grass. Enough! You're not going to destroy everything I've built." But something unexpected happened. As it fell, the false bottom of the chest came loose, revealing an old folder. Olivia quickly grabbed it, her eyes widening as she read the contents. "These are the original documents," she murmured. "All the evidence Brad's parents collected. Doris not only kept them, she encoded the information in the quilt patterns." "The butterflies," Brad whispered, recalling how Doris insisted on teaching him the meanings of each pattern. They weren't just designs. Lily, who was watching everything curiously, picked up one of the fallen quilts. "Grandma taught me that each knot tells a story. It's like a secret code that only quilters know." Arnold pulled an envelope from his jacket, his last card. "I have here a confession signed by Doris, claiming she made everything up." "A forced confession," Daisy interjected, still filming. Just like the ones you forced other tenants to sign, isn't it? The partner paled, finally realizing he was cornered. He tried to run, but two security guards Olivia had brought with her blocked his path. Brad, still processing all the revelations, knelt beside the overturned chest. Among the scattered quilts, he found one last envelope, sealed and addressed. To him in Doris's unmistakable handwriting. His hands trembled as he opened it, but before he could read its contents, a sharp scream cut through the air. Lily was standing in the kitchen doorway, her eyes wide and fixed on something inside the house. What she saw would completely change the course of that story, revealing a secret even deeper than all the others. A secret that Doris had protected with her own life. In the kitchen of the small house, time seemed to have frozen. Through the open door, everyone could see what had left Lily in shock, a secret compartment in the floor, revealed by the loose board, filled with old notebooks carefully stacked. But these weren't ordinary notebooks. They were accounting ledgers from the Sterling family, dating back 20 years. "Impossible," Arnold muttered, his face turning livid. "She couldn't have kept—" Olivia moved quickly, gathering the notebooks before anyone could stop her. Her experienced hands flipped through the yellowed pages, her lawyer's eyes quickly grasping the importance of those notes. "These are complete records," she announced, her voice trembling slightly. "Every irregular transaction, every misappropriation of funds, every threat made by the Sterling family. Doris documented everything." Josephine approached slowly, leaning on her cane. "My sister always said that walls have ears, but floors keep secrets. She spent years working in that mansion, observing, recording, and encoding it in the quilts," Brad completed, a sudden understanding illuminating his face. He returned to the yard and began to examine each scattered quilt with new eyes. Each pattern, each design, they weren't just decorative. Daisy, who was still filming discreetly, approached one of the most elaborate quilts. "Look at this," she pointed to a specific pattern. "These numbers intertwined in the design, their dates and values." Lily, recovering from her initial shock, ran to her grandmother. "Grandma, tell them about the special notebook, the one Aunt Doris sent on my birthday." Josephine hesitated, her trembling hands clutching her shawl. "It wasn't exactly a notebook, dear. It was an album." Before she could continue, a noise from the front of the house caught everyone's attention. Eleanor Sterling, 75 years old, the matriarch of the family that had adopted Brad, stepped out of a luxurious Mercedes, her face a mask of cold determination. "So this is where all the commotion started," she said, entering the yard as if she owned the place. Her eyes scanned the scene, the scattered quilts, the exposed documents, Arnold visibly disturbed, before fixing on Brad. "My son, you shouldn't be stirring up the past." "Don't call me son," Brad replied, his voice filled with an emotion that surprised everyone. "Not after finding out what you did to my real parents." Eleanor smiled, a smile without warmth. "What happened to your parents was a tragedy, of course, but we gave you a privileged life, education, opportunities, and silence," Josephine interrupted, her normally soft voice filled with unexpected strength. "You bought everyone's silence, didn't you? You even tried to buy my sisters." The Sterling matriarch turned to Josephine, studying her with calculating eyes. "Doris should have accepted our offer. It would have made things easier for everyone." It was then that Lily, who had disappeared silently during the conversation, returned running from the house. In her hands, she held something that made Eleanor Sterling lose her composure for the first time. An old photo album, its leather cover cracked by time. "Look, Uncle Brad," the girl exclaimed, opening the album to a specific page. "Aunt Doris kept all the pictures of you with your real parents." The photographs revealed precious moments, a young and smiling couple with a baby in their arms, picnics in parks, simple but loving birthdays. In each image, the same quilt patterns appeared in different forms: tablecloths, curtains, details on clothes. My sister didn't just keep evidence in the ledgers, Josephine explained softly. She created a code in the quilts that accompanied. Each photograph, bank account numbers, meeting dates, names of those involved. Everything was there, hidden in the designs she made while watching the movements in the mansion. Eleanor advanced, trying to take the album from Lily's hands, but Daisy was faster, placing herself between them. "Don't even think about it," the secretary warned, her cell phone still recording everything. "You don't understand," Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly. "It wasn't just money. There were secrets that could destroy entire families, reputations built over generations. And that's why my parents had to be silenced," Brad asked, his voice filled with pain. Olivia, who had been examining the documents found, looked up. "There's more, Brad. According to these records, your parents weren't just investigating the Sterlings. They discovered a much larger corruption network involving several traditional families in Jackson. And Arnold was the link between them all," Daisy completed, connecting the dots. "That's why he got information about the irregular loans so easily. He was already part of the scheme long before he became your partner." Arnold, who had remained strangely quiet, let out a bitter laugh. "You think you can just expose all this? That you can dig up secrets from 20 years ago without consequences?" But something in his voice had changed. It wasn't a threat anymore, it was fear. His eyes moved nervously between Eleanor and the folder Olivia was holding. It was then that Lily, with the perceptive innocence of children, made an observation. "That changed everything. Grandma, look, the butterfly quilt has the same design as the pretty lady's pin." All eyes turned to the gold brooch that Eleanor wore on her lapel, a delicate design of intertwined butterflies, identical to the pattern that appeared on Doris's oldest quilts. "It can't be," Brad murmured, approaching his adoptive mother. "That brooch, it belonged to my real mother, didn't it? It's in the old photographs." Eleanor brought her hand to the brooch, her face losing all color. But before she could answer, the sound of approaching sirens broke the tension of the moment. Olivia had alerted authorities she trusted as soon as she confirmed the gravity of the evidence found. As the sirens approached, Josephine stood up, with difficulty from her chair. In her trembling hands, she held a last envelope that she had removed from the lining of her shawl. "Doris made me promise to only give this if all the truths came to light," she said, extending the envelope to Brad. "It's time for you to know the last secret your real mother entrusted to my sister." The businessman took the envelope with trembling hands, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside it, besides a letter, there was an old brass key and a photograph that would make everyone present gasp in shock. The photograph trembled in Brad's hands as everyone approached to see. The image showed his biological mother, young and smiling, wearing the butterfly brooch. But what caught attention was the location. She was standing in front of an old colonial-style house in Jackson, holding an accounting book and a quilt with the same pattern as the brooch. Beside her, to everyone's astonishment, was a young Eleanor Sterling. "You were friends?" Brad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor collapsed into a chair in the yard, all her aristocratic posture crumbling. "More than that. Your mother Clara was my younger sister." The shock of the revelation made everyone gasp. Lily, who was beside Josephine, squeezed her grandmother's hand tightly. "My aunt always said there was more to the story," Josephine commented softly. "But she waited for the right moment for the truth to come out." Olivia, with her legal expertise, was the first to understand the implications. "That's why the adoption was so quick and discreet. You didn't just adopt Brad. You took custody of your own nephew. And hid it from him his whole life," Daisy added, her voice filled with indignation. Eleanor looked up, tears finally breaking through her facade of coldness. "You don't understand. Clara discovered irregularities in the family's business. She was an accountant. She had access to everything. When she threatened to expose the truth, her voice failed. "That's when Arnold came into the picture, isn't it?" Brad asked, turning to his partner, who remained detained by Olivia's security. "Guards." Arnold let out a bitter laugh. "I was just a junior accountant at the time. Your father, the great investigator Richard Quinn, was getting too close to the truth. Eleanor came to me, desperate to protect the family name." "And you forged documents," Olivia concluded, examining the evidence. "Altered records to make it look like Brad's parents' car had mechanical problems." "But Doris knew everything?" Josephine interjected, her trembling hands picking up one of the quilts from the ground. She had been working at the Sterling mansion. For years, she observed, recorded, encoded it in the quilts. Clara trusted her, shared information. Lily, who had been examining the key found in the envelope, suddenly widened her eyes. "Grandma, look! It's just like the key to your chest." Josephine took the key carefully, her eyes filling with understanding. "It's not the key to the chest, dear. It's the key to the house in the photo." Eleanor stood up abruptly. "That house was demolished years ago." "No," Brad replied, an old memory emerging. "I bought it 5 years ago without knowing its history. It's abandoned, but intact. And now we know why Doris insisted so much that I keep this key," Josephine said, her voice gaining strength. "Clara left something there, something that needed to be protected until the right moment." At that instant, a patrol car parked in front of the house. But instead of police officers who got out was Frank Adams, 62 years old, a respected federal judge known for his integrity. "Olivia filled me in on everything," he said, entering the yard. "The evidence you found can finally dismantle one of the biggest corruption schemes in Mississippi." Arnold tried to break free from the security guards. "This is ridiculous. They're just old quilts and worthless documents." "Documents that your own accounting team helped falsify," Frank replied calmly. "Doris didn't just keep physical evidence, she had digital copies of everything. She periodically sent them to a law firm in Atlanta, with instructions to be released if anything happened to her." Eleanor paled even more. "How did you—" "I was a friend of Richard, Brad's father," the judge revealed. "I followed his investigation from the beginning, but when he and Clara were silenced, we didn't have enough evidence. Until now." Brad, who had been absorbing all the revelations in silence, turned to Josephine. "Why now? Why did Doris wait so long?" The old woman smiled, sadly. "My sister knew she needed someone with enough power to face these families, someone who had not only the evidence, but also influence and resources. She waited until you became that someone, Brad." "And then you started collecting the overdue rent," Lily completed innocently, "and came here and found Aunt's quilts. Doris, it wasn't a coincidence," Daisy realized. "Josephine deliberately fell behind on the rent, knowing that Brad would come in person due to the value of the property. And I photographed every document, every quilt, while you were talking." The secretary continued, showing her cell phone. "Everything is already on secure servers." Frank gestured, and more patrol cars began to arrive. "Arnold Pierce, you are detained for investigation. Eleanor Sterling will need your full statement." As Arnold was led away, Eleanor approached Brad. "I really loved your mother," she whispered, "but the fear of losing everything, the power of the family—" "It doesn't justify what you did," Brad replied firmly. Then, looking at the key in his hands, he made a decision. "But now we can find out what she wanted us to find." Josephine tried to get up, her painful hands trembling. "We need to go to the house. Clara left something there, something Doris swore would change everything." "Tomorrow," Olivia interjected, noticing the old woman's fatigue. "It's getting dark, and we need to organize all this documentation properly." Lily, who was watching the movement with attentive eyes, tugged at Brad's sleeve. "Uncle, look what I found inside the album." In her small hands was a piece of quilt with a unique pattern, butterflies that seemed to form letters. "It's a map," Josephine explained, her eyes shining with suppressed tears. Doris always said that Clara's greatest treasure wasn't the documents or the evidence, but something much more precious. At that moment, a strong wind blew through the yard, scattering some quilts. One of them landed at Brad's feet, the pattern of intertwined butterflies that his biological mother loved so much. As he picked it up, he noticed something that no one had noticed before. Stitched discreetly on the back, there was a small text that made his heart race. Night was falling, but the true revelation was yet to come. In the old colonial house, a secret awaited that would not only complete the puzzle of the past, but also change the future of everyone involved forever. The old colonial house in the historic district of Natchez seemed even more imposing in the dawn light. Brad, accompanied by Josephine, Lily, Daisy, and Olivia, observed the worn facade with a mixture of apprehension and expectation. The brass key weighed in his pocket as if it carried all the weight of the revelations of the last few days. "This is where your mother worked," Josephine explained softly, leaning on her cane. Her hands, still sore from arthritis, clutched a small fabric bundle. Clara turned the second-floor office into her refuge. That's where she found out everything. Lily, holding her grandmother's hand, looked in wonder at the wrought-iron details that still decorated the entrance. "Grandma, they're the same butterflies as on the quilts." Indeed, the pattern of intertwined butterflies was repeated in the architectural details of the house. Brad took a deep breath and inserted the key into the antique lock. The mechanism turned with a creak, as if awakening from a long sleep. The interior of the house was surprisingly well preserved, despite the layer of dust that covered the draped furniture. Daisy immediately began photographing every detail, while Olivia made notes on her tablet. "Doris told me that Clara had a system," Josephine said, her eyes scanning the room. Each quilt pattern corresponded to a specific location in the house, the map that Lily found in the album. "It's here," Brad completed, unfolding the piece of quilt carefully. In the light entering through the tall windows, the pattern seemed to come to life. Following the directions of the encoded map, the group climbed the wooden staircase that led to the second floor. Each step creaked under their feet, as if the house itself were telling its story. The office was a large room, with built-in bookshelves covering all the walls. An antique mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, and on it, covered by a yellowed sheet, there was something that made Josephine catch her breath. "Clara's loom," she whispered, approaching with reverence. "Doris said she spent nights here, weaving and recording everything she discovered." Brad removed the sheet carefully, revealing a meticulously crafted manual loom. Attached to it, there was still an unfinished work, a quilt with the butterfly pattern, but something was different. "The butterflies," Lily observed, her perceptive eyes capturing the detail. "They form letters." Olivia approached, studying the pattern. "It's a simple code, actually. Each butterfly represents a letter. Your mother was brilliant, Brad." While Olivia and Daisy worked to decipher the message, Josephine untied the bundle she was carrying. Inside was a small brown book, its pages yellowed with age. "Doris's diary," she explained. "She recorded everything here, including the day. Clara told her about the safe." "What safe?" Brad asked, but his question was answered by an excited shout from Lily. "I found it! I found it!" the girl exclaimed, pointing to a loose piece of the baseboard. "It has the same design as the brooch." Indeed, carved discreetly into the wood was the pattern of intertwined butterflies. Brad removed the piece of the baseboard, revealing a small lever. As he pulled it, a soft click echoed through the room, and one of the bookshelves moved a few inches. "A secret compartment," Olivia murmured, helping Brad move the bookshelf. Behind it, embedded in the wall, was an old safe. The combination, Josephine said, leafing through Doris's diary, is in the quilts. Clara created a system where each knot represented a number. Daisy, who was still studying the loom, suddenly understood. The stitches on the unfinished work, it's not a message, it's the numbers. With trembling hands, Brad turned the dial of the safe, following the sequence indicated on the quilt. With a click, the heavy door opened. Inside, besides a folder filled with documents, there was something that made everyone catch their breath. A red velvet box and an envelope addressed to Brad with his mother's elegant handwriting. "Read it," Josephine encouraged softly. "It's time to know the complete truth." Brad opened the envelope carefully, and Clara's voice, preserved in her written words, could finally be heard. "My dear son, if you are reading this letter, it means that Doris managed to keep our story alive until you were ready to know it. We were not victims of a simple accident, as Eleanor and the Sterlings made everyone believe. We discovered something much bigger, a scheme that involved not only embezzlement, but also the protection of historic works of art from Natchez. The butterfly brooch I always wore was more than just a family jewel. It was a key, part of a set, created by artisans from Mississippi in the 19th century to protect documents that proved the true ownership of historic mansions in downtown Natchez. Mansions that, over the years, have been taken over by influential families through forged documents. Eleanor, my sister, discovered the truth when she inherited the brooch from our mother. But instead of doing the right thing, she chose power. I couldn't allow this cycle to continue. In the quilts I created, I hid not only evidence of the financial scheme, but also the location of all the original property documents. Each butterfly pattern corresponds to a mansion. Each knot tells a story of families who were unfairly stripped of their inheritances. Doris was not just our housekeeper. She descended from one of the original families, artisans who created the coding system in the quilts. That's why she immediately understood the importance of what we discovered. In the velvet box, you will find the original brooch, broken in two. One half stayed with me, the other with the artisans who kept the secret alive through the generations. Josephine, Doris's sister, keeps the other part, a symbol of the union between our families and our history. My son, don't seek revenge. Seek justice. Use what we discovered to restore not only the truth, but also the dignity of the families who were silenced. The real treasure is not in the documents or the properties, but in the story that the quilters preserved so carefully. Eleanor is your aunt, and despite her mistakes, she is also a victim of the weight of a secret too big to carry alone. Forgive her, not for her, but for yourself. With eternal love, Clara. When Brad finished reading, silent tears ran down his face. Josephine opened her purse and took out something wrapped in silk, the other half of the brooch. Doris entrusted this to me before she left, she explained, said that one day, when the truth came to light, the two parts would come together again. Lily, who was watching everything with shining eyes, picked up the two halves of the brooch. As if by magic, the pieces fit perfectly, forming a complete pattern of butterflies taking flight. The quilts were never just about keeping secrets, Josephine said softly. They were about preserving stories, keeping alive the memory of who we are. At that moment, footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of someone else. Eleanor Sterling, appearing to have aged years in just a few days, entered the office. "I brought something," she said, extending an old folder. "All the original documents that Clara discovered. I didn't have the courage to destroy them." Brad looked at his aunt, seeing for the first time not the powerful woman who raised him, but someone carrying the weight of impossible choices. "What will we do now?" Daisy asked, still documenting everything. Brad looked at the loom, at the quilts his mother had left unfinished, and then at Lily, who was playing with the reunited brooch. "We're going to tell their stories," he replied, "all of them, and then we're going to do what's right." 6 months later, the Clara Quinn Cultural Centre was inaugurated in that same colonial house. On the ground floor, a permanent exhibition told the story of the quilters and the mansions of Natchez. On the second floor, where Clara's office used to be, a quilting school welcomed students of all ages, keeping alive the art of telling stories through threads. Josephine, after a successful experimental treatment for her arthritis, returned to making quilts, now teaching Lily and other girls the secrets of the old patterns. Eleanor donated her private collection of historical quilts to the museum and little by little began to reconnect with her past and her family. And Brad? He discovered that his true legacy was not in the properties he owned, but in the stories he helped preserve. With each new quilt that Lily learned to make, with each butterfly pattern that came to life under her small fingers, he saw the smile of his mother, Clara, alive and bright as the quilts she left behind to tell her story. The butterfly brooch, now restored, occupied a place of honor in the main exhibition, but its true meaning was in the people who day after day entered that house to learn, remember, and celebrate the art that had preserved not only secrets, but also the essence of who they really were. For in the end, as Doris always said, the quilts were not just about creating beauty. They were about weaving memories, intertwining destinies, and above all, keeping alive the hope that the truth, like the butterflies on Clara's quilts, would always find its way to the light.